like you, I was kind of thrown into this world of afterlife evidence. I guess we could say evidence for the survival of consciousness beyond the demise of the body. After my dad died, moment, I got the very strong sense, message, signal. I don't know what it was, that it doesn't matter how intelligent a person is. There are some things that some people can see and other people can't see. And it has to do with how their brains operate, not necessarily how intelligent they are. And as intelligent as Penn is and other skeptics might be, their brains may work in a certain way that they're not able to see some things that other people are able to see. To do my own experiment the following week when she was coming to do the private reading. And the night of the reading, I was standing in my dad's house, which he lived in this kind of a back lot area, very much secluded from anything, just in the middle of trees. And all alone in his house, I said to him, I was trying to come up with like a code word, basically. And I was suddenly flooded with the memory that when I was a little kid, my dad, I would beg him at night to play with my hair to help me fall asleep at night. And I was suddenly flooded with that memory. And I said, okay, my hair. I need you tonight to get this woman to mention my hair. If she doesn't do that, I don't care what else she says. I'm not going to believe it. I need you to get this very specific message to me.
Title.
Today's guest is Mike Anthony. When Mike Anthony's father unexpectedly died, his family was left shocked and utterly devastated. However, when a phone call came out of the blue, delivering a complete stranger's message that Mike's dad had contacted her from the other side, it kicked off a chain of events that would entirely change Mike's family's perspective on life, death, and the transcendent nature of love. Mike Anthony is the author of Love, Dad: How My Dad Died, Then Told Me He Didn't. He also is in Netflix Surviving Death.
Today I have Mike Anthony. He is author of Love, Dad: How My Father Died and Told Me He Didn't. And we actually are friends and met at an event with, Laura Lynn, who I've mentioned on this before, Dr. Julie Beischel, with Dr. Julie Beischel, Mark Bacuzzi, and Leslie Keene, all of who I've either had on or have mentioned before. So he's like my afterlife twin, so he can tell you his story better than I can.
Hi, Liz. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, like you, I was kind of thrown into this world of afterlife evidence. I guess we could say evidence for the survival of consciousness beyond the demise of the body. After my dad died, so my day job right now is I'm an actor and a bartender, mostly a bartender. I work for Hamilton on Broadway. That's what I do, to make money. And then in my spare time, I research evidence for life after death, as well as things like UFOs and other quote unquote paranormal areas of inquiry. So yeah, it's kind of an odd life that I lead. And yeah, so that's what I spend the bulk of my time when I'm not slinging drinks on Broadway. I spend the bulk of my time thinking about and researching evidence for survival of consciousness.
I'm just going to put one side note in. Not only does Mike bartend for Hamilton, he also wrote another great book, not at all afterlife related, but still really good to read. What is it? Life at Hamilton? It's
called Life at Hamilton. Yeah. And actually there are a couple of stories in there. I've had some really interesting things happen related to signs that I now would consider to be signs for my dad at the theater. And so there are a couple of those stories in that book as well.
So I want to get into how you even started with all of this. So I think we had the same views at first. So you studied physics in college, am I right? And what were your thoughts on an afterlife initially?
Yeah, before I became an actor, I had gone to college to undergrad to be a science teacher. That was my intent. So I was a biology major for a couple of weeks. I was a physics major, geology. I was bouncing back and forth. Ended up getting a degree in none of them. I got my degree in acting instead. But yeah, so I've always been fascinated by science, and science, as you know, at least I should say, I guess mainstream science is very clear on the question of life after death and survival of consciousness, and that there is no survival of consciousness. That consciousness is an epiphenomenon created by activity in the brain, and when the brain stops getting oxygen, that's the end of consciousness. I never fully believed that, as much as I have always loved science and been fascinated by the questions it could answer. I tell the story a lot that, like, when I was a little kid, my dad would take my sister and I to an airport that was near our house, and we would watch these planes take off. And I could not fathom how these enormous, heavy things could be lifting off into the sky. How in the world could they be staying up there? And then when I got to middle school, I had this amazing teacher named Mr. Sawyer, and we learned about Bernoulli's principle, if memory serves. That's what it was called, which is what causes lift, and this is how airplanes stay up. And I felt like Mr. Sawyer every day was giving me these keys to these different locked boxes of information, and science was the key that was unlocking these boxes. And so I fell in love with science and the human ability to figure things out. But at the same time, I've also always felt that there is more going on, probably, than meets the eye, and that it's probable that there are things about the way the universe works that our scientific instruments are not yet, anyway, sensitive enough to register. And this really hit home for me in Mr. Mead's class in high school. It was a physics class, and that was where we learned about the double slit experiment, which I'm sure that a lot of your listeners are acquainted with. And
well, explain it again, because I still have to reread it on a regular basis, even though I've probably read it 500 times, because it's so mind-blowing. So
mind-blowing.
And I'll just tell everyone, like, full disclosure, I'm pretty open here. I sent my write-up in my book about explaining it to Mike to make sure I explained it well and got it accurate. So you're getting it explained to you by someone who really knows what they're talking about.
Well, it is mind blowing, and our brains are not set up to really fathom this. So it's no wonder that we have such a hard time comprehending this. So the way that it was first explained to me by Mr. Mead was, I remember learning that light is both a particle, it's a discrete particle in space and time, and it's a wave, a spread out area of energy. It's both of these things somehow at the same time. And I remember thinking, what? What do you mean it's both things at the same time? That's impossible. It cannot both be a discrete particle in space and time and also a spread out thing. But what the double slit experiment shows us is that it indeed is capable of behaving in both ways. So the double slit experiment, in a very basic way, if you have a sheet of paper with two slits in it, and then you shine a flashlight through it, it will form, if you have another board behind that piece of paper, on that board, you'll get what's called an interference pattern, a light band, dark band, light band, dark band. So it's as though a wave, you can think of it as if you sent a wave of water to this barrier, and then two waves went through the two slits. They would interfere with each other on the other side of that slit, and you would get places where the peaks of the waves would hit, and they would increase the height, right? And then you'd have places where they would cancel each other out. So this is what causes the difference in the amplitude, where you get the peaks and the crests, and you get light bands and dark bands. So with the double slit, where it gets really interesting, is that you can set up particle detectors, photon detectors, right, on these slits, and they will know whether or not a particle passed by them. If we do not turn the particle detector on, if we just shoot a photon or an electron, and we've now since done this with even larger particles and molecules even, which is totally mind-blowing. But if you send a photon through this detector and you do not have the photon detector on, an interference pattern will show up, meaning we don't know which slit it went through. So it looks as though it went through both slits, as though it went through as a wave. Instead of a discrete particle, it went through as a wave that then basically interfered with itself behind the slits and caused this interference pattern. If we turn on the photon detector, though, and now we know whether or not the particle went through the left slit or the right slit, instead of an interference pattern showing up, a discrete particle will hit the detector on the screen. Okay? So the only thing that has changed in this experimental setup is in the second case, we know whether or not it went through the left slit or the right slit. As soon as we register it consciously, it now shows up, the wave collapses and it shows up as a discrete particle. If we don't know which slit it went through, it shows up as an interference pattern, as though it had gone through both slits. And a wave went through both slits and interfered with itself. So what it seems to indicate is that somehow consciousness is involved in the equation, and that consciousness might be the thing that collapses a wave of possibility down into a concrete occurrence. That's the basic double slit experiment.
Yeah, and I'm going to end talking about it right there because it's so fascinating. We could do a whole episode on it, and it's so mind-blowing. So we'll just end the conversation about it there because I can't stop thinking about it or talking about it. And we'll get into your story. So then let's get into, so you, like me, lost your dad. And what was your very first experience of thinking? I know you said you kept an open mind that there might be an afterlife. You weren't set in it, but I'm assuming you just didn't spend much time thinking about it until your dad passed.
So the important part about that double slit experiment, learning about that for me, was that was where I realized that, okay, science does not have everything figured out, right? There are still questions here, unresolved questions. It is not the key that is going to unlock every single question, and certainly not the biggest ones. Namely, what are we doing here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? What happens after we die? These are questions that are still unresolved by science, and that science doesn't have the instrumentation in a lot of cases to even get involved in. So that helped me maintain this open mind, that though I believed very strongly in the scientific method and I loved it, I knew that there were still these open questions. And for me, the question of life after death was one of those things that remained open. And from the time that I was young, as I said, I always believed that there was something more than the eyes and the ears and the five senses could detect. I believe there was every possibility that there was more going on than that, and that when we died, certainly we might go on in some way. And that vague notion that we might go on in some way was enough to keep me happy. I didn't sit around worrying a whole lot about death. I was like, probably something happens. After my dad died, that vague notion was no longer nearly enough for me. And now suddenly every biology professor that I'd ever had who told me that consciousness is created by the brain was resounding loudly in my head. And that was all I could think, that, oh my God, what if that truly is the end of my father. And so when he died, my dad was an amazing man. We were incredibly close. And he died very, he was only 60, and he was a very young 60. We thought he was going to live a very long time. And he just dropped dead. His heart just stopped, and complete shock to all of us. So I was in this place of utter despair, and in an existential just crisis, thinking, what's the point? What is the point of anything at all if someone like my dad can just disappear? So that's where I was when he died.
I relate to that part so well. And yeah, that stage, it's just, it's so hard. And I know a lot of our listeners have been there, and that's why you guys are listening. So yeah, we've been there. And
it's a club that you everybody at some point ends up joining, and it's certainly got to be the hardest part about being a human being, right? Facing the end of the quote unquote end of lives of people we love. Even now, I'm 100% certain now, which we can get into why, but I'm now 100% certain that my dad continues his existence in some way. But that's still it's still very hard. Losing the physical aspect of someone, right? It's still probably the hardest thing about being a person.
Yeah, I would say it's the hardest, at least for me. Yeah. And so now, what was the very first hint you got then after losing your dad that, oh my God, what the fuck? Maybe something is going on.
Yeah, these things that we now would call signs started happening very soon afterwards. The first big one that I will never forget was my sister and I were in my dad's house the next day, the day after he died. So it's very fresh, and we're looking through his things and just crying and, just a mess. And my dad was not an organized man. His desk was a mess. He had papers, handwritten notes all over the place, and we were going through these stacks of paper and found this little torn off piece of paper. It was like 2 inches by an inch. And on it, he'd written, "Believe, a country song." Just those 3 words, "Believe, a country song." Okay. So we continue on down through the pile, and maybe another 10 inches lower in the pile, which probably related to another like 7 years earlier or something, we found another note that said, "Believe, tell Jen." Jen is my sister's name. So we put together, this is something my dad would do all the time. He would hear like a song on the radio and then make a note and then tell my sister, oh, I heard this great song. You should listen to this song. My dad communicated to us through music for our whole lives. Like there was a time when we were young kids, he put us in the car, we went for a ride, and he played a Carole King song. And he said, "I want you to listen to the song. This is how I feel about you." And it was called "Child of Mine." And so, we were probably 8 or 9 years old when he did that. So he'd always used music to communicate with us. So we were like, oh, this must have been a song he'd heard on the radio that he meant to tell Jen about. And he never did. He never did tell her about it. So a couple days after that, my mom had decided that she wanted to have some music playing for the wake. So we were sitting there trying to put a playlist together on iTunes. And I said, oh, Google "Believe" in country music and see if we can find that song. So we played it. Turns out it's a song by a group called Brooks and Dunn, the country music band, that none of us had ever heard before. It had been popular almost a decade earlier. And shockingly to me, it is about a guy who believes very strongly in life after death. That is what the song is about. It's a guy who had lost his wife and his child, and a young neighbor friend of his is asking him how he goes on with his life after having suffered such a terrible loss. And he tells this young neighbor boy, I'm able to go on because I have zero doubt that I'm going to see them again and that death is not the end. And it ends with the words, "You can't tell me that it all ends in a slow ride in a hearse."
Hey everyone! I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@wtfjusthappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title.
So the following, after the wake, the next day, I'm taking that slow ride in a hearse. And, and I should say, like, as we're listening to this song, my mom, my sister, and I, we're sitting on my mom's couch. We're hearing these words for the very first time, and we're all sobbing. And I'm like, how many songs, Liz, can you think of, popular songs that are about death and life after death? Right? It's like not.
I can't think of a single one, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's some religious ones, but religious music's not part of my life at all. So,
right.
And
yeah.
I can't think of a single one, actually.
Right.
Except, I guess this one. I only know about it because of you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super rare to hear a song in any circumstance that's about like life after death. So in that circumstance, you can imagine the three of us thinking, oh my gosh, this is pretty amazing. What are the chances of this? And again, it wasn't like he had found this song. It had been popular years earlier, and it was way down in this pile. So, if he had told Jen about that song all those years ago, we would have thought, oh, how sweet. Yeah, it's a nice song. But instead, finding it the way that we did, it's now become the most important song like in our life. So anyway, that would have been interesting enough. But what really is the icing on the cake for this particular sign that really made me think this cannot be simply coincidence was that after the funeral, I was driving back to New York, and for the first time I was alone. And you know how it is when you lose someone, especially suddenly, it's a whirlwind of activity, and you're making plans for the services. And a lot of times we kind of put grief off a little bit because we're in this sort of altered state of consciousness, possibly. And so in this car ride down to New York from Connecticut, being alone for the first time, it really hit me for the first time that he was gone. I remember thinking, I had my phone on my seat and thinking, I'll never be able to pick that up and call him again. And that thought was like a dagger, and I started sobbing. I'm on the highway and I'm sobbing. And now, from the time that there have been iPods and iPhones, I have always, as soon as I get into the car, plug the phone in and I play my own music, right? I never listen to the radio. I always listen to my own music. On this day, I didn't have the energy, didn't think to do it. And so that my phone was on my seat. I never plugged it in. And I hadn't been hearing anything, right? This whole time I'm just in my own head. As I'm sobbing now on the highway, I'm on Interstate 95 in Connecticut, in traffic, sobbing, and I'm thinking I probably should pull over here because I'm now crying so hard. I start to hear music, and I realize that my radio is on, and then I hear these words, and I think it can't be. This can't be, and I go to turn up the volume, and I'm actually afraid, Liz, to turn up the volume because if I am hearing what I think I'm hearing, I was worried that I would lose control of the car. That's my heart started to pound. I cannot tell you this. I'm getting chills right now thinking about this again. So I turn up the volume and I hear, "You can't tell me that it all ends in a slow ride in a hearse." It's that song on my radio that I didn't remember even turning on, that I never listened to. Somehow it had been tuned to a station that had that song on it in that moment. And then I call my sister and I'm screaming to her, listen to this, listen to this. And those tears of sorrow turned instantly into tears of joy and awe. And I mean, because in that moment, you could not tell me that was not my dad somehow pulling cosmic strings, getting some radio DJ somewhere to play a song at I don't know how it all works. I didn't care how it all worked. You couldn't tell me though that was not somehow my dad giving me this message that he had somehow made it somewhere else after his heart stopped beating, and that he was trying to communicate with me. So that was the first sort of sign that really made me open my eyes.
Yeah. And this is a little speculative, but this is just where my mind goes. And we can't go too into this because, again, this will be like a 2-hour conversation in and of itself. But it makes you wonder why he hadn't given it to Jen back then, and how it was there, almost as if there's some other way we're doing things and we don't know why, and as if this had been planned for years, like some other entity or discarnate or non-local aspect of ourselves who knows a certain range of time more than we do, and a certain range of the future knows, well, when I die at this date, I'm going to leave this here for Jen. And we're doing things that we consciously don't know, but there might be like a much more aware non-local part of ourselves, or a discarnate entity. The word spirit guides, everyone uses it. It's too woo for me. I can't say it, but something that maybe a medium would say is a spirit guide, that's like a non-local consciousness that's collaborating with us. And maybe it was to comfort Jen, but maybe the whole plan was for you. This was what you were meant to be doing. I have so many reasons I have come to think that about myself, as you or I, if the type of person who never in a gazillion years would have thought we'd be doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, just to go back to one more second to that double slit experiment, we won't go into this because, again, this is very highly complicated stuff, and I'm not smart enough to explain it, but there is something called the delayed choice experiment, which is a variation on the double slit experiment. And basically what it means is we've discovered that in essence, we can go back in time and alter the whether or not we know which slit the thing went through, and somehow back in time we're able to alter the outcome. So that is simply, again, I highly recommend. There's a great book by Brian Greene called Fabric of the Cosmos. He's a brilliant string theorist, brilliant guy, and he's got a real knack for explaining this stuff to lay people like myself who don't understand all of the math behind it and everything. Although he has that in there too, if you're interested in that. So I highly recommend that book if you're interested in learning about the quantum physics. So yeah, the possibility that time is somehow irrelevant from a different perspective, or that something operates outside of time, non-locally, as it would be stated by a physicist. There is science to back that up, that time is something that we don't have a real handle on. And of course, it's not time, it's space-time, right? It's one thing. Space and time are one thing. So again, we don't have to get further into that right now, but if you look into the world of quantum physics, where we are right now on the cutting edge of understanding quantum physics, it's a mystery, right? It's a mystery how all of this stuff works. So for anyone to say that anything is impossible when we don't even understand the foundations of how this universe works, and we don't understand the foundations of the universe, right? We build our entire understanding of chemistry, for instance, on the idea of charge, right? Positive and negative charges, and these are just words, right? But we know that some things like each other and attract each other, and some things don't like each other and they push apart. And as simple as that sounds, that's all we understand. Some things like to be together and some things don't. We've called it positive and negative charges, but those are just words. And what gives a thing the positive or the negative, quote unquote, charge? We have no idea. We have no idea what causes a charge to happen. So again, these are the foundations that we've used to build all of our equations on and all of our understandings on. So, science works really well at a macro level, right? We know exactly how long it takes a rocket to get from point A to point B, and it does a lot of amazing things. It's given us electricity and medical advancements, and we use it really well on this macro level. But at other levels, both very large and very small, the quote unquote rules, seem to break down, and we don't understand. We don't understand the deepest foundations of what makes quote unquote reality. So for any scientist to say that life after death is impossible, to me, that's just a silly thing to say when we do not fathom yet the rules.
Agree 100%. And now let's get back to your story. So the next thing was somehow you're talking to psychic mediums. How did that even happen?
Yeah, it's that's also a long story, and of course I describe it in detail in the book exactly what happened. So I won't go into all of it here. But the bottom line was we got contacted by a medium. That was how it happened. Typically, in a typical case, if there is such a thing, grieving people seek out a medium and hope to get messages from them. In our case, a medium got a message to us just days after the funeral, days. And at that point, all I had known about mediumship was there was a show on television when I was in high school called Crossing Over with John Edward. John Edward or Edwards? One of them was a politician. One of them was a medium.
Edward, and that's very fresh in my brain because Dr. Julie Beischel writes that in her new book that I just started reading, where she said it's John Edward, not John Edwards. Oh. Edwards is the politician. So
okay, great.
I read that 2 nights ago, so that's in my brain.
Okay, great. There's a nice little synchronicity. Oh, John Edward. So yeah, I'd watched his show in high school, and I was interested. I thought
that's going to be coming up. So.
Oh, how great. I can't wait for that. So yeah, Angelina helped Bob and Fran develop the protocol they used to test mediums. So she was their first certified medium. And so anyway, I knew none of that. My sister heard this woman on a radio, and that's how she contacted her. So my sister was very nervous about the reading that she was going to be having. For people who go to see a medium for the first time, a lot of times it can be sort of overwhelming. There's a lot going on, and it can be people are often nervous for various reasons. And my sister was very nervous about it. So she'd hired Angelina to come to our house. She was going to come to our house and do a personal private reading for like seven of us at my mom's house. The week before that, it turned out she was doing a large group reading at a theater that was going to have like 100 or 150 people. So Jen got tickets to that because she thought, oh, this will be a great way for me to just go and see how this all works before we have the private reading. So she thought this would make her less nervous to have a glimpse of it. Never expecting that she would get a reading, right? So she, my brother-in-law, and my mom sat in the back row at this theater, again, with about 100 and 150 seats. And Angelina comes out on stage and she does a little speech about how she works, a speech she gives every time she works. And then she says, okay, I'm ready to start. And she walks across the stage to the side of the theater that my sister is on. And she points to the back row and she says, I'm with you. Your dad is standing behind you in a Red Sox shirt. So she was pointed immediately to my sister. This is the very first thing she says. Your dad is standing behind you in a Red Sox shirt. She didn't say, is your dad passed? Nothing like that. That was the first sentence she said. Now, my dad, not only was he a Red Sox fan, we buried him in a Red Sox shirt. So that was pretty astounding. Now, another important thing that happened that day, after my dad died, Jen had been having a really hard time with his passing, of course, in very deep despair. And I gave her a book called Emmanuel's Book that a science teacher had given me years before. It's a great book that I highly recommend. It's by a woman named Pat Rodegast, who claims to channel a being named Emmanuel. And that channeling, this is a whole nother subject that we don't have to get into right now. All I'll say is that I read the book and with an open mind and thought, well, I hope everything in this book is true. I hope it's true. It's this beautiful, poetic book that basically talks about the notion that we travel in soul groups and we come back time and time again, and life is that Earth is a schoolroom in a sense. This is a notion that we've heard from a lot of different places, and anyway, it's just expressed in this particular book in a really beautiful way, and it really brought me a lot of comfort throughout my life. This book, so I gave it to Jen, and it brought her a lot of comfort. I gave it to her after my dad's passing, and the morning of that reading with Angelina at the theater, she was in her room and she said out loud, "Dad, I have to know that everything in this book is true. If you can somehow let me know that Emmanuel's book is telling me the truth, I'll be okay. I'll be able to get through this. But I've got to know that this book is genuine." So that night, after Angelina says this thing about your dad's behind you wearing your Red Sox shirt, and then she said a bunch of other things too that were all accurate. She finally then says, he shows me that you're reading a book. And she starts motioning with her, miming, like flipping pages. And she says, it's almost like you're looking through a manual. And now what she said was a manual, right? Not Emmanuel, but a manual. He shows me that you're looking through a book. It's like a manual. And Jen was like, oh my God, she just said Emmanuel, like in her mind, it was like my dad had just gotten Angelina to say the word Emmanuel as a manual. Now, the subtitle of that book it's Emmanuel's book, A Manual for Living Comfortably in the Cosmos. So Emmanuel is part of the title of the book, in fact. So that blew Jen's mind and it changed her life immediately. So that was where my idea for an experiment was born, because I then because I was not there for that. I had been working that day. I was going to be at the reading the following week at my mom's house. So I was like, well, if this woman is actually able to hear my dad, if my sister could ask my dad for a specific message and get it, then I want that too, Dad. It's not fair for you to give that to Jen and not me. And my dad in his life was very much about keeping everything equal for his kids. Everything was very much about being equal. So I decided to do my own experiment the following week when she was coming to do the private reading. And the night of the reading, I was standing in my dad's house, which he lived in this kind of a back lot area, very much secluded from anything, just in the middle of trees. And all alone in his house, I said to him, I was trying to come up with like a code word, basically. And I was suddenly flooded with the memory that when I was a little kid, my dad, I would beg him at night to play with my hair to help me fall asleep at night. And I'd be like, "Oh, Dad, 5 more minutes. And the guy, until his hand was a complete just ball of cramps, would play with my hair to help me fall asleep. And I hadn't thought of that in years. And for whatever reason, I was suddenly flooded with that memory. And I said, okay, my hair. I need you tonight to get this woman to mention my hair. If she doesn't do that, I don't care what else she says. I'm not going to believe it. I need you to get this very specific message to me right now. My hair, as you can see, it's just very average, normal hair. There's nothing about it that a stranger would come in and be like, oh, there's got to be a story about it. Just super average hair. So she comes to the house, and I had scrubbed the house, by the way. I had taken down pictures. I wanted it to be, make sure there was nothing she could be getting information from. And I'm trying to figure out how she's doing this trick, right? Because according to science, the science that I'd been taught, she had to be doing a trick. And I was going to get to the bottom of it. So she starts, and right away she's saying things that I cannot understand how she could know, things that are not published anywhere on the internet, things that are very private. And within 10 minutes, I would say, I was convinced that something was happening that I couldn't understand. And the reading lasted for about an hour and a half. And by the end of it, we were all in tears. We're all in tears telling her, this is the most amazing night that we've ever had. Thank you so much. And we're actually standing up to leave. And I had totally forgotten about my little experiment because the night had been so incredible. Everything she'd said was so incredible. I'm like frantically taking notes about every single thing she's saying. So I had just forgotten about my experiment. So she's getting ready to leave, and she was in the middle of a sentence, Liz. We're like saying our goodbyes basically, and she stops in the middle of a sentence, and she looks directly at me. Again, there were 7 of us there in a circle. She looks directly at me, and she says, "Your dad wants me to talk about your hair." and she did this little motion with her hand, almost like playing with my hair. And I almost died on the spot. Like I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe.
Oh
And
my God. I
my
can
mom,
imagine.
oh my
Wow.
God. My mom and my sister are saying, what's wrong? Because I hadn't told anyone, no one. It was entirely just me and my dead father who knew that I'd asked for that. So once I was able to catch my breath, I told them what had happened and why it was such a big deal that Angelina had just said that. So suffice to say, that moment was an inflection point in my life where I thought it's very possible something is going on here that science hasn't figured out yet.
Yeah, that's all amazing. And then I think we should just address this. So there was stuff such as the Red Sox shirt. None of that were posted on the internet. And the reason I'm asking this, this is the stuff I thought back then, but also the whole recent case of Susan Gerbeck, who exposed a medium. What was it, like Operation Peach Pit, I think?
Yeah, pizza something, or they did a ice cream peach. Something. Yeah, they had a few different, Yeah,
and if anyone hasn't read it, just very quickly, Susan Gerbeck, who runs a skeptical organization that exposes fraud, and I'm all for exposing fraud, and she has yet to come expose the mediums that I stand by. And basically she had people sign up under fake names to go to one of their events, and they linked to it on their Facebook account. They started posting all this fake information about a deceased loved one on Facebook, and all that came up during the reading.
All that came up, and nothing. Yeah, and nothing that was not posted came up. So they basically caught this person red-handed. Yeah, I am certainly not saying that there is not fraud in mediumship, right? I mean, it's been exposed time and again. I
just want to also add, like, Angelina was saying stuff that was not posted anywhere, right?
Absolutely not
to me. Yeah.
And certainly my request to have my hair mentioned was certainly not posted anywhere or even spoken out loud to anyone but my dead father in the middle of the woods. So, but this is where this becomes important, your question, because my brain could not let that go, right? My brain, I would have these amazing things happen, like hearing Believe in the car. And in the moment, I'm like, okay, I never have to hear another thing again. I'm on cloud nine. Life after death is real. I'm good. I don't have to know anything else. Then a half an hour later, my brain is going, well, what about this? What about that? So later on that night, after the hair thing, which I'm again, I feel like I'm float. When you come in contact with something so extraordinary, it feels, it's like an altered state of consciousness, right? You're kind of
yes,
you're just coming into contact with something extraordinary, and it's a particular feeling that I've had many, many times now. But after that feeling wore off, I was thinking, as ridiculous as this sounds, I'm thinking, could it be, Liz, that Angelina has on her staff, maybe she has a staff, I don't know, and maybe one of the people on that staff is a retired CIA agent with high-tech listening equipment, and he was posted in the woods outside of my father's house, and he heard me say to my dad, I need you to mention my hair, right? That's a ludicrous notion. I now know
that's
Angelina.
That's the stuff I thought too.
Yeah.
And I still question that stuff. And even when I go and analyze that much, it still can't explain for the stuff that's come up in my readings and other people's readings that I've watched.
Right. So. Yeah. So, but because of that little nagging thought that my brain would just not let me have this, that was definitely my dad. About a year after that, I contacted Angelina and I basically said to her, I got to know if you're actually doing what you say you're doing. I would like to make a documentary where I film you doing readings for people that I bring to you so that I will know there is absolutely no way you could have done any research, right? And to my surprise, she immediately said, sure, I'll do that. And signed a release before I had filmed a single frame, which has always stuck with me. She signed over ownership of this footage before we'd even begun filming. that's how much she trusted her own ability. And she trusted me, that I was not out to, I was out in 100% in good faith. I just wanted to know the truth, So I started doing readings with her on film where I knew there was no way she could have any. I often wouldn't tell anyone else on set who was coming in that day. Right. Often I was the only person who knew who was about to walk through the door. And so time and again, I've now filmed her doing probably over 20 readings. I go through 10 of those readings in detail in the book. And time and again, I'm now watching her get information of the same sort of specificity that she'd given to me. And I'm watching her change people's lives that I know she cannot have any information on unless she's done research on everyone on the planet. Because I took people from all walks of life, from all different geographical locations. I could have chosen anyone on the planet. And even so, I then...
And I just want to clarify, this was in a location you picked, so she couldn't have brought in facial recognition technology that would go through and do background checks. There was nowhere that could be, right?
No, I did this at my mom's house. Yep. And I've actually done it now in multiple different locations, all of my own choosing, just to be 100% sure about any of that. Yes. So then, as this is going on and she's still getting accurate information, I increased the sort of the controls on my little casual experiment. And so then I start thinking, well, the brain has abilities that we don't understand, right? Some brains are able to do things that are, for most of us, we just couldn't fathom. For instance, I'm forgetting the name of I'm not sure what to call it, but there's a syndrome. There's a situation where some brains, for instance, are able to remember every single moment of their lives, literally every single moment. So you could say to them, what was the weather like on April 17th at 2:00? And they could say to you, do you mean April 17th at 2:17 a.m. or p.m.? They literally remember every moment of their lives. And, we don't understand how that works. So all of that is simply to say that we know that the brain is capable of extraordinary feats sometimes. So maybe Angelina's brain is set up in a way where she's able to pick up on people's facial expressions in a way that most of us can't understand. Maybe she's somehow getting information that way. And maybe she doesn't even know she's doing it, right? Maybe for her, it really feels like communication from dead people, but actually she's, she knows what an eyebrow twitch means. Her brain somehow registers what an eyebrow twitch means. Anyway, so what I did was put up a barrier then between her and the people. So now she never saw them. I would have Angelina come in, sit her behind a barrier, and then I would bring in the sitter. And then she still was getting the same level of accurate information. So then I thought, okay, what if she's hearing something in their voices? Maybe her brain is somehow picking up on auditory cues. So then by the final iteration of the experiment, I had the person behind a barrier and I had them not speaking. They were just answering yes or no by hitting a button, and a little yes or no light was lighting up on Angelina's side of the barrier. So she wasn't seeing or hearing this. On my website, mikeanthony.com, I have a video that shows a little bit of our experimental setup if you just want to see what it looked like. So yeah, by the end of it, she wasn't seeing or hearing. These people could have been, I told her nothing about them. She didn't know if they were a man, a woman, or anything in between. She knew nothing about their age, where their background, where they were from. She knew nothing about them. She was talking to a barrier and not hearing anything. And she was, at least not with her ears in the way that we do, the average person does. And she was still getting this information. So by the end of those little casual experiments, and Dr. Julie Beischel, who you know well and I know well, she always chastises me whenever I say, well, I did these experiments. She says, you have to be very careful with the word experiment. And she's right. I'm not doing anywhere near the level of
totally
control.
Picture that.
Yeah. For people who don't know, Dr. Beischel does quintuple blind experiments in her research at the Windbridge Research Center, which is, obviously blows mine out of the water. So,
and we're also about to have her on as a guest.
Oh,
so
great.
All of you can listen to that. And I have an episode with Mark Bacuzzi, and her
Oh,
husband who does this with
fantastic.
her. So
Great, great,
yeah,
great.
I'll
So
link all that to the show.
in deference to Dr. Beischel, I'll be clear that I was doing casual tests for my own self, not rigorous in the way that she does them. But for me, for all intents and purposes, and for everyone on that set, it seemed like we had things pretty tightly controlled, and she was still getting this information, including what we would call sometimes dazzle shots, in this line of research, where she would say things that are just, it just seems impossible, that she could not, like, for instance, one of our sitters had a brother who died in an explosion, in his car on the highway exploded, and that's how he passed. And immediately she says, I'm smelling gasoline. And this was during the part of the experiment where she couldn't hear or see. This was a sitter who she didn't hear or see. So she says, I'm smelling gasoline. And then she says, oh, I have someone here who died in an explosion. Now that was the first thing she said. It's not like she took different shots in the dark. Like, do you have somebody who died of maybe a cardiovascular issue? And that person hit no, and like, oh, cancer maybe, and no. And then was like, oh, actually, I'm smelling gasoline. Wasn't an explosion. It was the first thing she said. Now, that's an unusual way for a person to pass, right? Thankfully, not many people pass in explosions. So that's an example of a dazzle shot where right away, the first thing she says to a person who is this is the person this sitter had come to hear from, by the way. It was her brother. And immediately Angelina says, I'm smelling gasoline. I have someone here who died in an explosion. I mean, what are the odds? For any statisticians out there, I would like to know, what are the odds that would be the first thing that you would say to somebody and have that be correct?
Wow. Yeah. All just remarkable. And I want to go back to talking about mediumship, but I also want to back up. Did you get an amazing sign that was a butterfly from your dad? I remember reading about that.
Yes. So, now the butterfly thing is something that's very easy for skeptics to jump on, right? And I understand this. Right after my dad died, I started seeing, or I'll say I started noticing butterflies in situations that felt profound. Now, of course, what a skeptic will say is that I wasn't suddenly seeing butterflies. I was suddenly paying attention to the butterflies. And I understand that, right? However, so the first thing that happened was, so I'd driven back to New York, and Believe was on the radio, and I had that amazing experience. The day after that, I was scheduled to go back to work for the first time. And I was living in Queens at that point. And I was up on a subway platform, ready to go into work, and thinking, I'm not ready for this. I was looking down at the ground, trying to just not cry, and I work on Broadway, right? Which, constantly interacting with people. And I suddenly felt like, I don't know that I can do this today. I don't know if I can handle this yet. And as I'm looking at the ground and thinking, I'm going to turn around and go back home and tell them it's too early, I'm not ready. Down in the subway track, which is the only place I would have seen it because I'm looking at my feet, I'm looking at the ground. I see this bright orange butterfly, monarch butterfly. And
I'm just going to say, I'm a born and bred New Yorker, and I always am like looking at things. I'm a very visual person. I would notice a butterfly in the subway steps. I have never seen one in my entire life. And again, born and bred, I've been taking the subway, not alone, obviously, with my parents, but since I was like 5 years old.
Very rare, like to see a butterfly in New York City. If you're not like up in Central Park, there's just not a lot of greenery in Midtown Manhattan for butterflies to be alighting upon. So yeah, it's pretty rare, right? Just in general. But yeah, so this first one, I see it down on the track, bright orange, and it flies up and it almost touches my nose. It's in my face. Like I can feel the wind from the flapping. And I'm like, it literally almost touches my nose. And then it flies up into the sky. And I was like, whoa. Now, that was interesting. And a whole bunch of other butterfly things happened, right? That I won't get into, but a whole bunch, not only for me, but also for my mom, my sister. There were just a number of them that were interesting.
And they're mentioned in your book.
They're mentioned in the book. Yes, I go into detail about what happened there. So this last one, though, this one was another life-changing moment, and the story is told. I took part in the Netflix series Surviving Death, which is on Netflix now, and in I think it's the third or the fourth episode, we tell some of this story that I'm about to tell you. So I was doing these experiments with Angelina, and I'm getting this data that to me tells me she's doing something real that we haven't. She's getting information via some pathway science hasn't yet figured out, and I'm blown away. And by now, I'm really thinking this is real. Life after death is real. There really are people who can somehow communicate with our deceased loved ones. Isn't this awesome? Right now, while I'm making the documentary, I'd been very aware of skeptics, right? Because I'm a guy of average intelligence. There are people so much smarter than me who are telling me this is impossible, right? They're so much smarter than I am. And they are saying, no, you have to be getting something wrong here. This can't be. So, one of these people, the performers Penn and Teller, the magicians, Penn Jillette, right? He's a very intelligent guy. Penn and Teller are devoutly anti-mediumship. They hold real vitriol for anyone who claims this because they believe there is simply no such thing as anything quote unquote paranormal. So it's their belief. And coming from this perspective, I understand it. It's their belief that because there's no such thing as anything paranormal, anyone who is claiming this ability is lying to you and is preying upon grieving people, right? So they are actually hold a whole lot of anger around this topic. And they were doing a show on Showtime called Bullshit, where they basically exposed mediums and tried to explain how some of these people do what they do. So, but I'm thinking, well, Penn has not seen what I've seen at this point, though. If he had been sitting beside me, as this woman said, I smell gasoline, someone died in an explosion, and watching the reaction of the person's face, and of course, I know already, I've heard the story from this person. I know how her brother died. Like, if Penn had been sitting beside me, I'm thinking, Penn, explain that one, right? So I'd been wanting to get Penn to be in the documentary, and I'd spoken with him, and he'd tentatively agreed to do that, and he'd given me the number for his manager and all of that. So anyway, as it turned out, while I'm in the middle of these experiments, Penn and Teller decided we're doing a show at the Marquee Theater on Broadway, which is one of the theaters I work for. I work for the Nederlander Theaters. We have 8 theaters on Broadway, and the Marquee is one of them. And they were going to be doing their show there. And I picked up the playbill one night and found that they were doing a bit called, I think it's called The Psychic Magician. And in this bit, they debunk, quote unquote, debunk mediumship, right? And he starts the bit with this speech about how everything he's about to do is simply a trick because there is no such. He gets very serious during this bit. There is no such thing as anything paranormal. Anyone claiming that, he says, is a pig or something. Like, he uses very strong language. And they're just evil. He basically says they're evil, anyone who claims this. Everything you're about to see is a trick. And anyone who claims the ability to talk to dead people, he says everything you're about to see is bullshit. That's verbatim what he says, right? So I'm standing in the back of the theater, and I'm listening to that, and I'm kind of smiling because I'm like, no. If you saw what I saw yesterday, Penn, you'd be singing a different tune, right? But then he does this bit. He and Teller do this mind reading trick that is amazing. It's amazing, Liz. I cannot understand how they're doing it. And by the end of the trick, I'm completely crestfallen. I'm in the back of the theater, and it's like all of these little tests I'd been doing with mediums had given me my dad back. And it was like what Penn and Teller had just done took him away again. Because I'm thinking,
I get that. Were they communicating, quote unquote, with someone who'd passed away, or were they doing?
No, because he very clearly says, we're not going to even pretend to be communicating with someone who's dead because we would not do that to you. So we're just going to pretend to read your mind. But anyone who is claiming to talk to dead people is doing exactly what we are about to do right now. That's how they frame it. And it is an amazing trick. I to this day, I do not know how they did. I have a little more of an inkling now because anyway, it's an amazing trick. And I'm in the back of the theater, and it's like they had just taken my dad away from me again. And I'm thinking, well, is there maybe Angelina is somehow doing whatever these guys are doing? As hard as that is to believe, they have spent a lifetime rehearsing this and practicing this and honing this trick. And Angelina, she was a TV reporter. She had, like a whole life. I couldn't. It was hard to imagine that she'd had this whole separate secret life where she was like perfecting mentalism and mind reading tricks. But anyway, that's what I'm thinking at the back of the theater. And I walked out of that theater totally distraught. And it was almost like I was back in that pit of despair that I was in right after his passing. And I decided I was going to go back and watch again the next night because I wanted to try to understand how they were doing some of what they were doing. So I go back the next night, which is hard for me to do. I'm like having a hard time walking back into that theater because I'm thinking I don't want to hear this again. I really don't. But I have to, for my own scientific purposes, I have to see if I can try to understand what they're doing. And then maybe I can try to understand what Angelina's doing. So he does the whole speech again, verbatim. Every word he's saying is like a dagger in my heart. And then he says, everything you are about to see is bull. And then he pauses for effect between bull and shit. Everything you're about to see is bull. And right after he says the word bull, Liz, I see about 10 feet above his head, there's this flutter in the lights. And I look up, and it's an effing butterfly up in the lights at the Marquee Theater. Now, this butterfly is flapping all around his head. He doesn't know it's up there. But soon, other people in the audience, just so that I know it's not a figment of my imagination, now it's flying over the audience. And there's like a titter in the audience. People are going, oh, because no one ever sees a butterfly in a Broadway theater, right? Ever. Now, this is
I never, ever have. Again, grew up in New York. I've gone to Broadway a lot.
No, I've worked on Broadway for 17 years now. 17 years. That was the first, and at that point, only time. I'll tell you one other thing. But at that point, it was the first and only time I'd ever seen a butterfly. And not just seen it, Penn is right in the middle of telling me that there's no way my dad could still be alive. There's no way. He's literally saying everything you're about to see is bullshit when I see the butterfly. Okay, so it's like my dad was using Penn Jillette's speech, very strong speech against, to tell me, no, everything is not bullshit. Okay. So then I go back. Now I'm the opposite feeling. Now I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible. I just saw this butterfly. Everyone else in the theater saw this butterfly. So then I go back the next night. I wanted to watch the whole show because I wanted to make sure they didn't use like butterflies somewhere in the act and that one had like escaped or something. And they didn't. There was no butterfly anywhere in the act. So this was just 100% mind-blowing, right? So about a week after that, I was back in my theater, the Richard Rogers Theater. No, I should also say, by the way, the Marquee Theater, where I saw this butterfly over Penn's head, it's on the third floor of the Marquee Hotel. So you have to go, it's in the middle of Times Square, right, where there are no trees, and it's very rare to see a butterfly outside, let alone inside. You have to go inside the doors. You have to go up an escalator. Then you have to go into the theater doors to get into the theater lobby. And then you have to go into another set to get into the actual theater itself. So this butterfly somehow made its way through all of those obstacles to be over Penn's head as he was saying those words. So a week later, I'm standing behind my bar at the theater that I work at, the Richard Rogers, and I'm talking to my bar partner, Marie, and we're behind the bar, and we're talking about that, and I'm saying, I mean, have you ever seen a butterfly in a Broadway theater? I'm saying that to her, and she's saying, because she'd also worked on Broadway for like 10 years at that point, and she said, no, I don't think I ever have. And while we're having that conversation, I see out of the corner of my eye a flutter, and I turn around, And lo and behold, there's now a butterfly in our theater as we're having this conversation. I have pictures in my book of this butterfly that landed up in a chandelier. And I have pictures of people's faces, and they're all like looking at it like, is that a butterfly? They're all shocked, and they don't know this story. That look of surprise on their faces is just at the fact that there's a butterfly there, because none of them had ever seen a butterfly in a Broadway theater before. So when you see their faces of surprise, that has nothing to do with my story. They're just surprised to see a butterfly. If they'd only known about the context that I was experiencing at that moment. So, and then a few days after that, Penn and Teller had a night off. Their show was dark that night, and Penn was at Hamilton, and he was standing underneath that chandelier where that butterfly landed, and he was leaning up against my bar. And I, in that moment, this was another sort of very powerful moment for me, because as I said, I put so much stock in what skeptics had to say, right? People who I view as more intelligent than me. You know, I've always viewed my intelligence or lack thereof as the barrier, right? I'm only going to be able to understand up to a certain point that my intellect is going to allow me to get to. Yeah. And then after that point, I'm in the dark. And after that point, I'm relying on people who are beyond that barrier to report back to me what it is that they're seeing, right? And I had always viewed someone like Penn as being further than me down the intellectual pathway, and listening to him to report back to me. But in that moment that he's now leaning against my bar. I'm standing there. We're 2 feet from each other. He's a very big guy. And I'm looking up at him, and he's standing under that chandelier where a few days before this butterfly had landed. And in that moment, I got the very strong sense, message, signal, I don't know what it was, that it doesn't matter how intelligent a person is. There are some things that some people can see and other people can't see. And it has to do with how their brains operate, not necessarily how intelligent they are. And as intelligent as Penn is and other skeptics might be, their brains may work in a certain way that they're not able to see some things that other people are able to see. And like for Penn, I would never be able to convince him that butterfly flapping about over his head as he's saying everything you're about to see is bullshit. I'd never be able to convince him that was a sign from my father. There's no way. But for me, in that moment, as he's leaning against my bar, I just had this overwhelming feeling. Now, so there's nothing scientific about this at all. This is just an overwhelming feeling emanating from my chest that I don't need him to tell me this anymore. I just don't need it. I now had a sense, some sort of a deep sense that there are things that are unexplainable, and it doesn't matter how many people tell me they are explainable if I truly believe they're not. And so that's where that story led.
I love that and relate. And I'm just going to ask about 2 to 3 more questions, then we'll get into UFOs.
Sure.
So one question, I just want to back up a little bit. You said you now have an inkling of how Penn and Teller are doing this. What is your inkling?
I won't give anything away because of codes of magic and all of that stuff. But I did a little more research about that particular trick that they do, and it is a great trick. So I don't want to give away anything. But it has to do with math and force. You know, the idea of forcing in magic, where you force a card, or you basically force a person to choose something without them realizing you forced that choice on them. It has to do with that. It's a great trick. It's really great. But it is a trick, and it is not what Angelina is doing. That I can say for sure. It's not.
I've gone and seen Mentalists. I know we have together. We went and saw Darren Brown, who's amazing.
Oh my God.
And one of the coolest shows I've ever seen. But the tricks that he is doing is not at all what I know you and I know we talked about it right after. We were relieved because we were going in scared.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized after this is not at all mediumship.
Yeah, it is scary because they are amazing. Like Darren Brown, that guy, that last trick that he did, remember? I mean, I still have no idea.
One question, actually, two. First of all, why do you think, though, that the skeptics and mainstream scientists are dismissing this? Because my thoughts are the same. My immediate thought when I first started reading Windbridge, I was like, if there wasn't a catch, like there's no way there isn't a catch, because otherwise all of science would just be stopping everything to examine this. But they're not, and there isn't a catch. And that has changed a lot of my worldview. Why do you think the skeptics and scientists aren't stopping everything if this is as good and genuine as you and I have come to conclude?
I think it has to do with cognitive dissonance. This is something I talked with Jim Tucker a lot about. Have you had him on your podcast?
I have not. I've emailed him and I haven't heard back. So if you know him, tell him to get on my podcast. That is good.
Okay, yeah. He's the head of the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. He does remarkable research into children with memories from lives that appear to not be their own. And I interviewed him for the documentary that I'd been working on. And I asked him that very question because the evidence that they have at DOPS is so profoundly.
And DOPS is Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia.
Division of Perceptual Studies. Yeah. The evidence that they have gathered there for over 60 years now is so powerful, in my opinion, in my view, that anyone who goes there and takes an honest look at it would have to come away concluding, okay, it seems that some kids are having memories that are not their own, right? Like that's how strong the evidence is. They have thousands of cases and some of them meticulously researched. Anyway, so I asked him, why is it then that this is not on the nightly news? If this evidence is so strong, so clear, it's like as clear as the evidence for like smoking being bad for your lungs. Like that's how clear the evidence is. Why isn't this on the nightly news? And his answer to me was that, well, most scientists simply are not even aware that this evidence exists. They just simply aren't looking at it. And I think that's the basic answer, that things of this nature that are beyond the boundaries that we've set up as being, quote unquote, respectable science, for a lot of scientists, it's dangerous for them as far as their careers go to look at this stuff. The way that our current systems of science go, we rely on money. Often in like the university system, we rely on money. And if a university gets wind that one of their professors, for instance, is doing research into anything that could be considered to be less than reputable science, that person's job could be in jeopardy, right? And I think that it's that and just cognitive dissonance, right? Which is something else I talked with Dr. Tucker and other psychologists about. The cognitive dissonance is just the idea that when the brain is very good at dismissing anything that is going to disrupt its worldview. Yeah, right. If you have a sense of how the world operates and you're comfortable in that sense, of course, we like to be comfortable. If information comes in that is going to make us uncomfortable, the brain is just really good at letting it go by as though it had never even heard it. You know what I mean? Because that's too much to think about. So as simple of an explanation as that is, I think that is a part of it as well. And another part of this might be that a lot of scientists, you spend your life, you spend your mental energy, your time on studying something, right? And it takes a ton of work to get to where you are, to get to the understanding that you've gotten to. If information comes in that entirely disrupts the foundations of what you've understood to be the truth, and now you realize, oh my God, I'm like back at square one. All of that work basically just fell apart. That our identities can also become entwined with what we spend our time and our thoughts on. So a lot of very, very smart people, part of their identity, I think, could be mixed in with what they're studying and what their ideas are about what they're studying. And so anyway, there are all kinds of psychological aspects. The fact is, there is incredible evidence out there. As I said to you earlier, I thought that if what John Edward was doing was real, certainly scientists would have studied it by now. As it turned out, they'd been studying it for over 100 years. The Society for Psychical Research, both the British and the American versions. William James, one of the smartest scientists of all times, like brilliant people. Charles Richet, a Nobel Prize winning physiologist. Brilliant people have studied this and have concluded time and time and time again that there is something going on that we can't explain. It's just that we forget, or it's like we're constantly going back to square one, like we're retreading old ground that other scientists have tread in the past.
I've also noticed every time a mainstream scientist does go study it, they're no longer considered mainstream scientists.
Exactly.
And then they're moved to, so
exactly. Yeah.
It's like the names you just mentioned. Okay. So last afterlife question. What would you say is the biggest what the fuck you've seen, maybe that hasn't been mentioned in your book, that you've experienced since that time? Or what would you say is the most compelling, mind-blowing, any of it related to afterlife evidence?
Well, the most compelling is in my book. And I almost didn't include it in the book because it was so so crazy that I worried, because my book is written in a very sort of logical, methodical way. And I was worried that you'd get to that last chapter and where I write about what I ended up experiencing and then think, oh, well, turns out this guy's just nuts. But it was the truth. It is what happened. So I did include it in the book. And so this is the thing. So we've been talking about mental mediumship, right? Which is the mediumship that most of us are familiar with, John Edward and so on. Laura Lynn Jackson that I know you know, and Angelina. There's another form of mediumship called physical mediumship. And in this is more rare. In this form of mediumship, the medium goes into what we would call a trance. At least this is what they claim, where they are no longer conscious of what is going on. So when Angelina does what she does, she is in at least a semi-conscious state. She's walking and talking and hearing or seeing or feeling things, and then trying to interpret these messages, and then using her own voice to deliver these messages. She's being, as she says, a microphone for the other side by interpreting these things that she's experiencing. In the case of physical mediumship, the claim is that the medium goes into a completely altered state of consciousness where they are no longer aware of what's going on in the room. And then the quote unquote spirit world uses the medium's physical apparatus in various ways to communicate. I guess the simplest form of that communication would be where the spirit folks use the medium's vocal cords to speak in their own words. So this was something that I read about in Leslie Kane's book, Surviving Death. Now,
and Leslie has become Mike's mentor. He's like, Fran and Bob in my life is Leslie to Mike. I'll just clarify that.
That's right.
And
that's right. Yeah.
Leslie Kane is very smart, logical. So I know what you're going to say. And this is the thing I can't wrap my mind around. I'm still stuck in it the way I was, like mental mediumship, the first day I read about it. So everyone prepare yourself. This is the best story ever.
This was a life-changing, to say the least, paradigm shifting. It was actually shattering when it happened. It was psychologically shattering in a good way, but it was a lot. So anyway, Leslie Kane, who is now one of my best friends. I happened upon her book in a Barnes and Noble. I won't get into that whole story now, but there are a whole bunch of synchronicities around that as well. I'm reading her book, and by that point in my research, I had learned already most of what she was writing about. I'd already run into most of those topics.
And this is her afterlife evidence book, because she has a couple. This is
that's right. Sorry,
Death,
this is her. This is Surviving Death
series is based on.
That's right. Yeah. So she covers things, like near-death experiences, children who remember past lives, after-death communications, these topics that anyone who ends up researching life after death, like you and I have run into. So most of that stuff in her book, it's a great book, and I read through it in one day. And then I get to the last couple of chapters, which are about physical mediumship, and it describes this phenomenon. And I'm thinking, if it were anyone but Leslie Kean, whose work as a journalist, she's an investigative journalist, and I trusted her work. She's so smart. She'd written a book earlier about UFOs that is a New York Times bestseller, and she's just such a smart woman and such a meticulous researcher that if it were anyone but her, I would think there's no way this can be true. So anyway, she writes about this guy named Stuart Alexander in the last two chapters of this book, who's this physical medium who sits in the dark once a week, every Monday, and then the spirit world in this little room takes over his body and does all kinds of phenomenal stuff in this room, including the use of ectoplasm, which is a substance that somehow comes out of Stuart's body, and then the spirit world uses it to manifest physically there in the room. Now, ectoplasm, I was 100% sure was a word invented by Ghostbusters. I was 100% sure that's where the word ectoplasm came from. As it turns out, it's not. It's been studied by people for over 100 years, including, as we mentioned, Charles Richet, a Nobel Prize winning physiologist. And Leslie describes in these cases, it can take on different forms, this substance. It can be kind of smoky. It can be kind of liquidy. It's very difficult to describe the actual nature. It can look like silk sometimes, she said. So she goes to see this guy, Stuart, after a great deal of work, because he's a very, very private person. And he allows her to come and sit. And she describes what she experienced. She experienced this substance coming up over this little table that she was sitting by, and then congealing into 2 digits of a hand, and then a full hand that then banged on the table to show how solid it was, and then grabbed her hand and shook it. And she said she could feel the bones in it. It was like a full human hand. And then she said she let it go, and then it dissolved back into nothing. So that was probably the most spectacular of the multiple claims that she made that she saw in that room that night. So I finished the book, and I'm like, oh my God, what I would do to be able to experience that, But I thought, there's obviously no way. This guy is incredibly private. There's just no way to do it. I won't get into the whole story. I'll just say that less than a year after finding that book, less than a year, Liz, I was sitting beside Leslie Kean in that same room with Stuart Alexander about to have a seance. And with my own eyes, I watched from 5 inches away, because I wanted to throw like a monkey wrench in. I was like, can I kneel by this table? And they said, sure, you can do that. So I ended up leaving my seat, coming down to the table, kneeling beside it. And I'm literally 5 inches from this. And I watch a substance that is impossible to describe. The way that this moved, the fluid nature with which this stuff moved is just impossible to describe. But it came up over this table. It was about a foot and a half or 2 feet of stuff. It was like over the entire surface of the table at first. And then it came together. It started to come together in the center of the table. And again, I'm 5 inches from this. And then I see a hand form out of this smoky, liquidy like substance, right? And then just like she described in the book, it makes a fist, and then it bangs on the table very loudly to show everyone that this is a solid thing. I watch it now grab Leslie's hand, okay? And she's shaking the hand. And then I'm leaning down like this. So I'm seeing a hand floating in the air, connected to nothing. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing over here. It's just a disembodied hand shaking Leslie's. And then she lets go, and it goes back down on the table, and then it dissolves and slips away into nothing. And in that moment, as I've talked about before, I for a long time, if somebody had a whole bunch of degrees up on the shelf behind them, I was inclined to respect what they had to say. After seeing this, it now does not matter to me how many degrees, how many PhDs a person has. If they say to you, there is no such thing as anything quote unquote paranormal, they do not know the whole story. They have not seen everything that there is to see. They have not sat in this little room in England on a Monday night and watched, which I've now watched this happen many times, a hand form, a human hand, a full, huge human hand form out of smoke, and then dissolve back into it and disappear.
And, my mind, because I have not seen this, and my dream, like yours, is to go get to see it one day too. And I know that's a hard thing. And so, but I trust you. I trust Leslie, but my mind still goes to, this has to be a magic trick. But you were there. Leslie was there. And both of you, hearing this, like me, would think this has to be a magic trick. And this is me stuck in the cognitive dissonance. I think this is the right way to use cognitive dissonance. I trust you. I trust Leslie. And everything I know about Stuart Alexander, I trust, completely opposite of the quote unquote physical medium I saw that I cover in my book. Hi, Pickles. Everyone say hi to Pickles.
That's the famous Pickles.
No, Peanut's the famous one.
Oh, that's Peanut. Okay, got it.
Pickles is her predecessor. So trying to be famous by scaring and chasing dogs, hoping page 6 comes for him. Yeah, everyone knows the Harvey Weinstein story. So yeah, Pickles is trying to be famous like Peanut and not doing a very good job. So yeah, and I can also say that is not even the weirdest story of my life, and it would be by far the weirdest story of my life if I had not gotten involved in afterlife research.
If you want to learn how I went from being a skeptical atheist who thought there was zero chance of an afterlife to a skeptical atheist who thinks an afterlife is highly probable, come check out my books. WTF Just Happened.
Yeah, and this is where my cognitive dissonance is. This is not possible. But I've seen so much, this isn't possible, but this is the next level of this is not possible. But you and Leslie must have had those same thoughts and then saw it and experienced it and touched it. And there's no magic trick that you could see that this could be done.
I had the very same thought that you had. Like, I trusted Leslie completely, but reading her book, I'm thinking, God, she must have been fooled in some way. I mean, I believe that she's telling the truth, but they must have fooled her. And so this can't be real. Again, it just can't be, or someone would have said it.
I'm like,
but when I was,
you wouldn't lie, Leslie won't lie, but
yeah.
You must be, I keep thinking it must be such a good trick that the two of you are fooled.
That was definitely what I was thinking. So I should also say, being who I am, I wanted to really study these people. So I went for a week and lived in this, spent every second that I could with Stuart at his house and with his family and with his friends. And I got to know them really well before the sitting happened. And I wanted to see if I could detect any sign of deceit or anything like that. And there was simply nothing. We had dinners together. We talked about their family. He and his wife have been together since they were like 14 years old, that sort of a couple. They met when they were like in middle school. They have these beautiful children and grandchildren. His grandchildren are his whole life. I could just detect nothing but a good person who stumbled upon this extraordinary ability. That's another story, which he writes beautifully in his own book about how he came to discover his own ability. And he's so secretive about it. Even his adult children didn't know about it until Leslie finally got him to agree to let her write about him in her book. This is a man who wanted the opposite of publicity because he was a very successful business person. He wanted no one in his life other than the friends that he had these sittings with to know what he was doing because he thought it would sound way too weird to them and it would be detrimental to his professional life. So he didn't even tell his adult children what was going on for all of these years. So yeah, it is not a magic trick. That's all that I can say. Because watching it from the vantage points that I have, and I've now seen it happen in multiple different rooms, different places, some of which are not his places, so it's if he's doing a magic trick, he's somehow taking this show on the road to other people's houses and things, and without any time to set anything up. And also the table that this is done on, it's this tiny little rickety, I mean, it's the most humble, beautiful little home that they do this in. Leslie and I were allowed, of course, to investigate so I'm like banging on floors, the doors, like trying to see, could there be any sort of a secret hatchway or something? And there's just absolutely nothing. And once you meet these people, you realize it's absurd to even think that, because they would be fooling themselves. Most of the time, it's the same like 5 people, these friends who've gotten together for, at this point, 40 years, with no publicity, no money is ever exchanged. These are just 4 friends who get together once a week to sit in the dark and talk to dead people. So once you realize who they are and how they live, you realize like it would be, they'd have to be either 100% complete sociopaths, fooling themselves even, or it's just something real that happens. And it's real. There is no magic trick here. There is magic, because if we just call magic things that we don't yet understand about the universe, that is real. But having watched it from the vantage points that I have, including from 5 inches away, no, it is definitely not a magic trick. Definitely not. Because when I saw that, like, Stuart is sitting over here, Leslie's here, the table's in between them, and I'm over the table. So I have Stuart on my right, Leslie on my leg. I can see Stuart's legs here. It is not a magic trick. That I can say.
And you see Stuart the whole time, because the physical medium, I mean, I figured out within 5 minutes it was fake. I mean, like less than that. And he had his personality, I could tell pretty easily too. There's just a lot. Everything you said about Stuart's the opposite of this one. In my book, I refer to him as seance medium, but I couldn't see him during the seance. He went behind curtains that are called a cabinet, but you could watch Stuart the whole time.
Yeah, he's so a lot of, for most physical mediums, it takes place in the pitch black dark, which of course is a huge red flag. I now understand though why this seems to be necessary, and there's a lot to the whole thing. But yeah, in Stuart's case, he's developed far enough that a lot of what he is able to do is done in the light. So like, or a dim red light. Red is the lowest energy visible wavelength. And according to physical mediums, ectoplasm is very sensitive to light. And it's like film developing in film can only develop in a dark room, right? It's they say the process is somehow similar to that light is just detrimental. Now, there have been physical mediums, like a guy named Alec Harris, and I have pictures in my book of a woman named Minnie Harrison, who was so developed that her spirit people were able to form in light, in full white light. And I have a picture of what is a fully materialized, I now believe is a fully materialized form. And it's hard to believe when you look at that picture, you think, no, that's a woman in a sheet. There's no way. But I now know a lot of the people who are involved with that circle. And I 100% believe that they are genuine, and that photo is real. That is a real photo of an ectoplasmic form. So with Stuart, yeah, he's able to, for instance, when you see the hand form, there's a red light under the table. So you're seeing it with your eyes. You're seeing this thing. I saw this, the fluid movement of this stuff. And Stuart is sitting over here, and he keeps like illuminated tabs on his knees so you can see where his legs are. He's strapped in, his arms are strapped in, his legs are strapped in. And of course, you're able to test all of this stuff. Believe me, Leslie and I have tested everything possible. Stuart is the real deal. Now, I've also sat with mediums that I am very skeptical about, physical mediums that I'm very skeptical about. And we've caught many physical mediums lying in the past. So again, I'm not here to say that all people who claim this ability are actually doing what they claim to be doing. And of course, there are frauds out there, and there continue to be, sadly. But just because some people fake this stuff, obviously does not mean everybody fakes the stuff. And I can tell you, not everybody fakes the stuff. Stuart Alexander is the real deal.
Wow. Okay, so we could do a whole episode just on Stuart Alexander, physical mediumship, but now this is the perfect entree into UFOs. Leslie has also studied UFOs, and I'm not as educated about UFOs, so I'm not going to have the same level of questions. I almost don't even know where to begin. So tell me something. I don't know what else to say.
Man, yeah. So I'll tell you this. When I was in high school, I co-founded the Phenomenology Club. Which made me very popular, as you can imagine. Every Wednesday after school, me and a group of my friends would get together again with Mr. Sawyer. He was the teacher who was there, and we would talk about Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and UFOs and ghosts and anything to do with paranormal activity. I have, that's just to say that I've long been interested because of Mr. Sawyer. Mr. Sawyer, who was the one who I told you, told us about Bernoulli's principle, but he was also very much aware of the things that science couldn't yet explain. And he was fascinated by those things that science couldn't yet explain. And so things like, could it be Bigfoot? Could that be real? Could there be this, and UFOs was one of the topics we covered. And so I've just long been fascinated. And it seemed to me way back then that there is just so much videographic and photographic evidence that it seems like something real might be going on. And of course, this is back in the day. I know it's going to be hard for you to believe this, Liz, but I'm 46. And back when I was the co-founder of the Phenomenology Club, there was not any Photoshop. The idea of faking videos and photographs was much less of an issue than it is now. Now you can see something, and who knows if it's genuine or, and especially now with AI, I mean, it's basically impossible to say whether or not something was actually captured or not. But way back then, it was less, much more rare, or took a lot more doing, I should say, to fake things. It took a lot more effort. You had to double expose and, all of this stuff. Anyway, there were so many videos and photographs that I just thought, it seems to me like there's got to be something to this. But, and then if my 15-year-old phenomenology self could know that one day I'd be best friends with Leslie Kean, if you could have told him that, that would have blown his mind for sure. So for people who don't know, Leslie wrote the book UFOs, Pilots, Generals Go on the Record, which is a huge bestseller. And she was the woman who co-authored with Ralph Blumenthal and Helene Cooper the 2017 New York Times article, which was at the time, I think still actually, the most widely shared article ever published on the New York Times website, that exposed the Pentagon's recent UFO program. It was a $22 million program that was investigating, it was called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. It was Harry Reid, who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time. It was the person who was responsible for establishing this. Anyway, the point was it was a legit government program where a guy named Lou Elizondo, who he was the head of it, and they claimed to have videographic evidence from highly sophisticated sensors of something behaving in a way that our current physics would say is impossible. And so she broke that story in 2017, and things have just snowballed and continued to move forward since then. And although not as much as I thought, I remember because I'd been friends with Leslie already by the time she was getting ready to publish that article. So I knew it was coming. And by the time she published it, I was like, okay, I'm looking around, is there going to be people out in the streets? What's going to happen? And then it was nothing, not much happened, And then not long after that, they published another article where they talked about a crash retrieval program a government crash retrieval program. Where the implication was we have a program to recover craft made by non-human intelligences. And that was published in the New York Times, right? The paper of record. And again, it seemed like it got very little play out in the streets. People were not like up in arms about it. And fast forward, last year we had a congressional hearing about it. We had another one a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And more is coming down the pike because we've, in the National Defense Authorization Act last year, there was a language for that protects whistleblowers, people who claim that they've been involved in research programs through working for the United States government or through contractors, working with material that is not human craft, basically. And so these whistleblowers have been talking to Congress. There's a group now called ARO, which is the All Domain. These acronyms are ridiculous, but this is the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. So all domain.
What are the? Okay, you'll email me the link and I'll put it in the show notes because the RO, it just sounds like letter RO.
It's like arrow, yeah, ARRO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. All domain meaning air, sea, space, wherever we might capture an anomaly, their object is to resolve that and try to get to the bottom of what it was. So we have these whistleblowers who are talking to this office, as well as directly to Congress, apparently. And the word on the street is that information might be forthcoming fairly soon. What people keep saying is months, not years. Some people claiming by the end of this summer, that will basically put an end to the debate of whether or not there is such a thing as a non-human intelligence interacting with this planet.
Wow. And this is like reputable government agencies. And so now, would this be interdimensional, or would it just be, there's no doubt that there's life on other planets. There's multiple galaxies, solar systems, other Goldilocks planets. Nothing, you don't need to be that into anything that's considered out there, unexpected, to think that there most likely is intelligent life on other planets. So is this any different than like a species we might not see here that's also intelligent, that just evolved a little differently than us to be not so different than humans? Or is it something more than that?
I think that's an open question for at least most of us. Some people would say that there are people who have more answers on this that have not been publicly shared. Yeah, a lot of this is difficult to talk about only because there are national security implications is the idea, I think. So there are multiple things. So for instance, if we did have a craft that was super advanced, that was made by some form of intelligence that's not human, advanced, much more intelligent than humans are. Now, you mentioned, could this be like interdimensional? Yeah. I mean, who knows? We're only now, we don't, like, are alternate dimensions actually real things? Like string theory would posit that there have to be, I think, like 12 or 14 or something like that, other dimensions. I mean, these are things that are at the very boundaries of science right now, right? But so could they be interdimensional? Whatever that might exactly mean. Yes. The idea that they could, as you said, this universe, right? It's 15.4, I think, billion years old. It's so many light years big that we cannot even begin to fathom it. So for sure, there's life all over the place. For sure. The question is, could it possibly get here over these vast distances? Well, if they've just figured out how to like manipulate space-time and bend things, then who knows what's possible. So anyway, if we did have a piece of technology, let's say, that was super advanced, given humans' history, we know that unfortunately we're not as evolved as we wish we were in a lot of ways, and our tendency is, of course, to weaponize. Right? That's always, unfortunately, the first instinct, it seems, of the military, is to take a thing and how can we weaponize this thing, right? People were using LSD, like in the counterculture, to try to open up their minds and experience expanded consciousness, and then the military immediately says, well, how can we use this as a weapon? Sadly, that's a real tendency, right? A human tendency. So you could imagine that if you were in a position where you had access or knowledge that we had something, I could understand being very, very worried about that technology getting into the wrong hands. Because if it could be weaponized, the idea is that whoever could crack this tech could rule the world, right, with it. So there's that. There's also, I think, the worry that this would be, for a lot of people, we talked about how paradigm shifting it is to experience mediumship in a profound way, right? Or to see a physical medium produce a hand out of thin air. That is paradigm shifting. And when I saw that happen with my own eyes, I had a moment where, it was really kind of shattering. I was like, oh my God, like everything I thought was true is not necessarily true. And like, I'm like sort of starting over from square one here. And it's just a lot. And I think if the government were to come out tomorrow and say, yes, we have evidence that humans are not only are we not alone, but we're not even close to the top of the intellectual food chain, I think that might be hard for a lot of us to take. We have a history of thinking we are the center of the universe, right? When Galileo tried to say, hey, it looks to me like we might be going around the sun, they wanted to they put him under house arrest. Like they didn't even want to look into the telescope, as of course the story goes, because we were so used to the idea and liked the idea that we were the center of quote unquote God's universe. And we have a long history of course, we anthropomorphize everything, right? That's just natural, it seems. And so for the idea that we not only are we not the center of the universe, but we may be way down on a low rung of the ladder as far as intelligence goes. For a lot of us, that could be difficult to hear, I think. And so I think there's a worry about societal upset. For a lot of people, this will have religious implications for sure. If we were to be told unequivocally that we're not alone in the universe, there is some form of intelligence that's not human. What would that mean for a lot of religious, a lot of believers? There's always economic concerns, of course. As we saw COVID happened and immediately we ran out of toilet paper. So there's obviously always worry about how people will react to a thing like this. But there's a lot going on, it seems to me, behind the scenes. Of course, Leslie knows obviously a lot more than I do. And her sources are people who know what they're talking about. And I totally trust her vetting of those people. And a lot of them, again, are right now talking publicly to reporters and to Congress. And, the information is out there for the people who want to go look for it. It just seems to me that a lot of people are not wholly interested in looking for it, and which I understand. It's a lot to think about.
And these are people in the intelligence department. I know you can't go into which branches, but these are not like the guy next door who keeps talking about this. These are serious military, reputable people who have
Yeah.
access to a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the guy who sort of started this most recent round of disclosures is Lou Elizondo, and Harry Reid wrote a letter saying, yes, Lou is who he says he is. He was the head of ATIP, which again was the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. And Lou is the one who he then resigned because Lou was seeing so much information that he thought the public deserved to know. He thinks that there's a way that we could let some of this information out while maintaining national security, right? Like he agrees that there are certainly maybe some technologies that we would want to be very careful about how we handle. But he thinks that it's amoral. If there is evidence that more fully completes the contextual picture of where humans are in the universe, he feels that it's basically immoral to not share that information. And so when not enough was being done, he resigned from ATIP and brought this story to Leslie, basically, is how it happened. So that kicked this off. But so that's all very public information. Lou Elizondo, and you can anyone can Google this and find out who he is and his name and everything. And yeah, the other people who are involved are that Leslie knows are definitely not just her neighbor next door. Yeah, they are people with security clearances. They're scientists, members of the intelligence community. Yeah, there's a lot of information that is, again, currently public. There's a lot that I think might be made more public in the coming, again, what I keep hearing is months, not years. So it could be that a year from now we're living in a much different paradigm. And it'll be very interesting. I mean, once the question of UFOs is sort of accepted as not something that's fringe, but real, then that opens up all kinds of things, right? Including our investigations into consciousness, and because there appears to be a connection with consciousness and UFOs sometimes. For instance, sometimes an event will occur involving a quote unquote UFO, and multiple people will witness the event, but each of them, when they're asked to describe what happened, will describe something else, seeing something else. They might have a different experience of the time that passed during it. It seems that the consciousness of the individual experiencing the thing might affect what they saw. So it just opens up a whole lot of questions, which I'm all for, because I feel like I've been on this little boat for a long time. Like since, again, I was that 15-year-old kid going, Ma, I just saw this video today. I really think UFOs are real. And they were like, what? Come on. You know what I mean? So I feel like I've been on this little boat with a couple of other weirdo friends saying, hey guys, look at this. And finally, I feel like our boat's about to get a little bigger and we're going to take on some more passengers. And my hope is that it ends up, it might be scary and unsettling for people, especially at first. But my hope is that it ultimately just opens us, our minds and our hearts in some way. Yeah, that's my hope.
To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There, you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts.
It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFjusthappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?